Cool. All right. Welcome everyone. As Shafraz said, my name is Nick. I'm an AWS community builder, serverless enthusiast, and the founder of the Wollongong AWS user group, which is the city where I live, which is about an hour south of Sydney by car in Australia. Speaking can make me anxious sometimes, so my plan is just to distract you with blinking lights so you ignore how shaky my voice is. So let's see how this goes. If you don't know me, I have probably the biggest Christmas light display in my city. There's a picture of my house there. Last year, I was somewhere around 60,000 LEDs, plus the spotlights on my roof, which can be seen from 10 kilometers away. I've tested and they're awesome. This year, I'll be closer to 75,000 LEDs as I'm waiting for another order to arrive by boat from China. And yes, you may think talking about Christmas lights in July is ridiculous, and you're right. I usually start in April, so we are late. The software I've written is called X-Wings. And sorry, this talk is called X-Wings, and it's about some software that I wrote that controls these wings. So if you see on the right-hand side of the screen here, I have these wings where the point of them is all the visitors, you can see, can you see my mouse pointer? Or the big arrow, the orange arrow there? Cool. Visitors come to see my Christmas light show and they can stand in front of those wings and they can actually scan a QR code and change the color of the wings to whatever they want and then take a selfie or take a photo of their kids or whatever. And it's hugely popular. So usually I give a demo with the wings, but the wings are currently stored in my shed until about November when I'm setting up my light show again. So today I'm demoing with a brand new snowflake, which I finished making yesterday. I'm going to put 3 of these on my roof this year. And they act pretty much the same way. So I said you guys are going to be able to control the lights. So pull out your phone, scan that, and ignore when it says undefined, because then some pretty little colors will appear on your phone. And you can just tap the color, and I'll wait until a few people have triggered my lights. There we go. There's my snowflake and the pretty colors. You can all interrupt each other as you're all now doing. Every 1 second, it will allow someone to start a new light sequence. So feel free to keep playing with that as I'm talking. So one of the features of my Christmas light display is the audience who visit my house get to control it. The past 2 years, I've had a QR code where people can scan and bring up my website and vote on which song plays next on my house. It's hugely popular. My neighbors now hate Ed Sheeran with a passion, but they mostly tolerate it and invite their friends over too, so it's not all that bad. Now, a really quick backstory. We have a community of Australian Christmas light enthusiasts, and we even have a mini conference for this. And it happened a few weeks ago in Sydney. And one of the members of that community came down from Queensland last year and saw my lights on my house. And he loved how I implemented the wing triggering system, which is what you're playing with right now. So a lot of people in this hobby are more electronics hobbyists than serverless hobbyists. So they build boxes that look like this, where you tap on a button to pick the color that you want the wings to be. Usually there's a Raspberry Pi involved with GPIO pins, and I assume a whole bunch of annoying soldering. And this is what my friend had built for his display. And he told me they get hit, smashed, broken by kids. They have to waterproof it in case it rains, so it's a bit annoying to maintain. And he genuinely loved my whole scan the QR, then control them from your phone thing. You don't have to deal with any of this, which is in the picture. So I got to work to building a platform where anyone with a set of wings can use my website to trigger them. And this is where the idea of X-Wings came from. And just as a side note, the software we use to build our light shows is called X-Lights. So that's where I got the name X-Wings. Now, I wanted to learn a new framework, and a friend was building something using Svelte. So I chose to use something I could easily ask him about instead of waiting for Stack Overflow responses. And it was a great choice because Pete Sparsky's awesome. I also wanted it to be serverless, easy to deploy, and cost almost nothing to run. So I used Serverless Stack to manage the AWS resources behind it. And while I was making this slide, I have to mention that the 13,500 LEDs I ordered for this year just arrived. Yay. So that's when I can start building all my things. So a little bit about Svelte. The too long didn't read version is that it's like React or Vue, but it has a compiler, and it compiles into JavaScript, which means there's no runtime for the client and it's super fast. It's got awesome built-in features like transitions, animations, and a store, which is an object you can subscribe to. and that allows you to be notified of when the stored value changes. And I use this a lot for a live vote count for songs people are voting on for my voting app for my house as well. Now, a little bit about Serverless Stack. It's a serverless application framework. It supports lots of languages: JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, Golang, C#. You can use your favorite front end, Next.js, Svelte, Remix, Astro, or Solid State, and any backend component you require. There's probably one built for you already by someone else, either in the community or supplied by Serverless Stack themselves. So if you want a database or authentication, it's like 5 or 7 lines to get these components working, which is really awesome. You can very easily deploy your environment locally for testing or to AWS with one command. It's just a simple SST deploy. I use this in a GitHub action. So as soon as I commit to my GitHub repository, it takes about 3 minutes to redeploy the entire stack to my AWS account, which works really well. So let's talk about how I build X-Wings. I always start by Googling serverless stack Svelte, and this amazing, really simple tutorial is the first result. And I use this tutorial as the base for everything I've built, and I'll have this link available at the end of my talk. So don't worry about trying to figure that out now. Once I've got a blank slate, but a working project template, I added authentication. And while Svelte has its own built-in authentication, I wanted to try out Auth0. As it's tried, tested, and I've never actually implemented it myself before, so I wanted to give that a try. And like most things, a Svelte component existed of it already. So it was a quick npm install, and then this little import statement just at the top of the screen, and that's it. I had it working in about 3 lines of code. You're able to, all you have to do is change the domain and the client ID, and then you can start using the variables provided by the Svelte component. So here, if the page is still loading, it just shows the text loading. Otherwise, if you are authenticated, it will show the front page. If it's not authenticated, it just shows the login button, and that's it. That's really all I had to do. And then I began with the backend infrastructure of my stack. Super simple, DynamoDB database per Wings website. I'm storing the subdomain that they'll want to use and the domain and the port of where I'm going to send the API requests. So they will have an API running in their house for me to be able to send the request to it to trigger their Wings. They can also modify the page text of their Wings as well, and the page title. And I'm using the subdomain as the primary key, but I also have a secondary index of the user ID, which allows me to search for entries via the domain or by user ID. And then I built my API. Really simple. You define the permissions the API has. You define the routes, which links your URLs to your Lambda functions. And I've got 4 Lambda functions in use. One will get all of the user info by domain. The other one will get all the user info by the user ID. And then I have a trigger wing function to actually do the triggering, and then a set user function to save the user information back to the DynamoDB database. And that's all that was required for my backend. Serverless Stack creates the DynamoDB tables, the API gateway, the Lambda functions, all via its own CloudFormation on the backend. I don't have to touch it. I don't have to think about it. It's just awesome. It works great. And then I built my front end. Now, fair warning, design is not my strong suit, and my designer friend was going to redo all of this, but he's too busy at the moment, so we'll give him a break. The owner of the Wings can configure their Wings here. They need to specify the subdomain they want. And assuming it's not taken, they can freely change it to whatever they want at any time. My page supports dynamic domains through dynamic SSL certificates and CloudFront. It works really great. You can just change the word demo there and it'll reflect that right there, and it'll just work as soon as you hit save. You then have to enter something called your FPP domain or IP address. And this will be your home IP address where you're running FPP. And FPP is the software we use to actually push the light data to the light bulbs. So you've got software which was called X-Lights, I mentioned earlier. That's where you design everything, and then you basically render it, you put it into FPP, and FPP you can actually hit play and it triggers the lights. You can specify the length, the sequence length of the Wings, and this is how long the lights will show on the Wings before someone else can interrupt it. I usually give my viewers 10 seconds, but you can change it to 1 second or a minute or whatever you like. 10 seconds is enough to pick a color, stand in front of it, and take a photo. For this demo, that's set to 1 second, so you guys can keep interrupting it constantly. You can also specify the start channel of your wings, and that's just telling the computer where the first pixel is in your wings, or in this case, in my snowflake. So the first pixel is about there, and on this system, it's pixel number 1, but it's possible that you have multiple snowflakes and Christmas trees and all these other things in your display, and your wings won't be on pixel 1. And if you actually re-render your sequence and your wings move position, it's really annoying to have to recreate all of your sequences to where that first pixel is. So allowing the user to specify it right there just saves you hours of work of having to redo all those. Now, one svelte thing I wanted to mention here, that all of these input boxes are already bound to their variables. That means, as I said earlier, when you type the subdomain, it changes it there. But all of these, when you click save, it's already stored in objects in my svelte code. So it just writes that single object to the DynamoDB. It makes it really easy to work with. You don't have to go through and pull all these values out of the input boxes and everything. So that's one of the other things I love about Svelte. And then you've got the page configuration where you can set your page title, your page text, and then add all of your wing sequences. The color picker I use here, again, is another Svelte component built by someone else, so less work for me, and it works really well. So you can pick whatever color you want associated with your sequence name. Now, if you visit the page which was configured, it shows the title text, the description, and the wings that were defined. And when you tap on these, it calls my Lambda function. The Lambda function does a bunch of checks. Firstly, to see when the last time the wings were triggered, to make sure there were at least 10-second delay before allowing someone else to trigger again. Then it sends a HTTP request to my API, which triggers the lights. And then it writes the current time back to the database, so we know when to calculate the next delay from. So this is just a small snippet of the Lambda function. I build the base URL using the user's provided user domain and port. I add the API command path to the end of it, and then I actually stop the last set of wings from playing just in case it's still playing. Otherwise, you get overlapping sequences, and that can break the lights and they get all weird. So it's best to just stop them. I then just build the effect start URL and simply make the HTTP call with Axios. All in all, it's a pretty simple single page application once you break it down like that. Now, I've only spoken about my wings here, but my entire house also uses a very similar system for the song voting. There's just a bit more logic to determine which song is currently playing, tallying up all the votes, and so on. It then triggers my API at home to play the next song in exactly the same way that this is triggering the wings. And there they go. I'm glad you guys are having fun with it. Now, keeping in mind, I've never probably worked as a programmer in my life, so I've probably done all this wrong. Any questions? And if you have any feedback about my talk, I have a URL there. I'll chuck it in WebEx as well when I find that window when I'm done. But yeah, that's all from me. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Well done. A lot of great stuff. I'm pretty sure if you have any questions, Nick will be around to answer these questions. And thanks everyone for playing around with the demo as well. So that was pretty interactive while the presentation was going on.